letting you all know, and we'll start in a minute. Thanks. Thanks, Liz. We'll be finished by then.
It's up to you. I don't know if you had a plan.
Okay, welcome to this briefing of Tuesday the 6th of June. Welcome. Just a bit of quiet. Welcome to this briefing on Tuesday the 6th of June on our alcohol policy, background information and policy considerations, and I'll pass over to staff.
Hi. Some of you will have been at a recent interactive session that we had on the local alcohol policy, and I feel that there is a keen interest to talk more about this topic. So we'd agreed that we'd come back to the table, and that's today. We have Chris, who you know, with us, and Chris is going to run through just a bit of, I'm going to call it a factual presentation, to make sure that we have all the information on the table, and then we'll do a bit of Q&A after that. If people have got any questions or issues that they want clarified, so that we're heading into the next decision, which is seeking your approval for next steps with the local alcohol policy, which Chris had briefed you on at our interactive session. So I'll hand over to Chris and he'll run us through that.
Yes, good afternoon, councillors. This is, as Chris said, a sort of quite a factual run through. It's really just to put on the table the salient facts around the local alcohol policy, and to give you the background that you will use or can use then to come to your decisions when we come back on this topic on the 13th of July at the Strategy, Operations and Finance Committee. At that committee you will be asked whether you want to proceed to develop a local alcohol policy or not. Also at that, with that agenda item, there will be quite an extensive report that this has been drawn from. Okay, for the day, we're going to start off with a quick recap, and then we're going to look at what is overarching policy considerations, then alcohol sales, supply and consumption, trends and facts for the country and more especially for Kapiti. We're going to look at what alcohol-related harm is and who are our vulnerable populations in relation to that harm, and then a short section at the end just to think about the questions around should we have a policy or not, and if we did have a policy, what may be the parameters we want to look at. Okay, so for the recap, Council has considered the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act twice in the last 12 months. The first time was a consideration around the Harm Minimisation Amendment Act, which was a private which was a private member's bill. Council decided to support that bill and did so through a council resolution. That bill looked at removing the appeals process to local alcohol policies and restricting alcohol advertising and sponsorship. That bill ultimately failed just a couple of months ago. It failed to get the majority to proceed in Parliament. More recently, in February, in December, the government brought out an amendment bill, the Community Participation Amendment Bill. Council considered that in February and put in a submission. Our submission generally supported what was in the Act. Sorry, I keep saying the Act, what was in the bill. However, we did have 2 points where we recommended a tightening of the proposed eligibility around who can object to a licence, and in lieu of removing cross-examination, recommending that lawyers be excluded from District Licensing Committee meetings. That was, I guess you might say, a slight softening of what's in the amendment bill, but Council considered those to be more workable. Uh,
Sorry, just a point of clarification on that. Did we? My understanding was that we recommended that lawyers not be able to act, but could be present.
Can't quite remember the details.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Currently, 41 of the 67 territorial authorities have a local alcohol policy, and that covers about 35% of the country's population. The reason for that is that all the main centres don't. So Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington and Christchurch do not have one, and that is primarily due to the fact that they are so vigorously contested by the alcohol industry. Auckland has very recently, literally in the last month, finally won a consideration at the Supreme Court, who have upheld what Auckland has been trying to do, and so they will be bringing their local alcohol policy into force, if it hasn't already happened, I would say in the very near future. It took Auckland 8 years to get to that point. Okay, policy considerations. What do we need to think about when we're looking at this? The Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act does not provide any automatic updates or review at the national level. So there's no requirement for central government to look at altering the age restrictions, set minimum trading, minimum unit pricing, or to restrict alcohol advertising or sponsorship. We do have an excise duty on alcohol, and that is automatically increased every year, and you probably will remember the last few weeks the news items about it going up and the dire profit considerations that the alcohol industry have said are going to happen. Additional to this, of course, is there's GST on alcohol, like there is on all other items. The Act may be changed for an amendment bill, and currently we have the Community Participation Bill before Select Committee, and must be just about ready to go back to Parliament. Of the only policy amendment provision in the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act are those that are around the local alcohol policy. So what basically government has done through the Act is push down to local government that decision making at a community level. And the basis for that was that the Act was supposed to provide the opportunity for communities to have more say over the sale and supply of alcohol in their areas. That unfortunately has not really happened, and the statistics about only the low number of councils that have, let's say, LAPs support that. Other options that council can take, rather than doing a LAP, is to strongly advocate on any national actions that are like the Community Participation Amendment Bill, or it can look at some other policy options, and I'll touch on those a bit later in the presentation. Okay, what are the national and local policy levers? Well, for national, there are the age restrictions. Government can change the age of when alcohol can be bought, and it has done so over at different times over the last 30 years. It has come down from 20 down to 18. At one stage, it was 20 and 18 if you had a responsible adult with you. That didn't work out very well, so that's why that disappeared. there's minimum unit pricing. That is where government imposes a minimum price on a standard measure of alcohol. We don't have that. However, we do have the excise duty that is, and the way that is applied essentially does the same thing, and it is more effective in the sense that it covers a wider range of beverages more thoroughly. Drink driving limits, hurt people in a different ways, how they change their behaviour somewhere else. And that has, over the years, become tighter and harsher. And for those under 20 and or unrestricted or licences, the alcohol breath limit is 0. Government can also do things in health and education and addiction policy and support those areas more fully and treat alcohol addiction as a health issue rather than as a regulatory issue. For locally, we have the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, and we have the 5 different areas that council can do something about, which is license numbers and density of outlets, location and proximity, both to each other and to sensitive sites, operating hours, one-way door restrictions, and council can also put in some special conditions specific to its area that can be applied to licences in particular circumstances. We also have under our district planning abilities, we can have location and zoning restrictions that we can put on by saying, for instance, off licences can only be open business in this area and not in that area, etc. We have place-based bylaws, and we have a very effective one in our alcohol in public places bylaw that has been working very effectively over the 10 years or so since it's been in place. That kind of that public places bylaws and liquor ban bylaws kind of overlap in that way. And we have general policy responses where we could have policies like, for instance, saying alcohol cannot be consumed in any council facilities, or if we're running something with our name on it, council's name on it, then alcohol is not to be part of the sponsorship or support of that. So there's those sort of softer approaches that council could take. Policy considerations, it's all about a matter of balance. A LAP is primarily to support the public good, i.e. to minimise alcohol-related harm. Council needs to balance the evidence. What is that harm? Community well-being. How does the community well-being fit into what we would do around alcohol? And public-private benefits and costs and rights and responsibilities. We have the right of individual drinkers to enjoy their drinks. Nobody really wants to take that away. The right of the alcohol industry to profit from the sale of alcohol. That's fair enough, I guess. And the right of society to protect itself from the harms of alcohol. Balancing those three was also done at the level of the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. That's those are the 3 considerations national government had to look at, and they are also essential to any considerations we have over putting a LAP in place. In relation to what we put in place, the policy response should be reasonable and proportional, and the test that it has to meet, or its elements have to meet, is purely and simply that it is not unreasonable in light of the object of the Act. However, council can take a precautionary approach. It can say, while there is not hard evidence at this point in time that harm is being caused by this level of licensing, we believe that a reduction in licensing would make things better. The Supreme Court, in its very recent ruling in the Auckland Council case, that's a quote from their ruling. So what is the purpose and the object of the Act? The purpose of the Act is that its characteristics and its administration are for the benefit of the community as a whole. And that's again that balancing. Our community is made up of a lot of subgroups, retailers, the public, those who wish to drink, etc. The object of the Act is that the sale, supply and consumption of alcohol should be undertaken safely and responsibly. It doesn't say that it shouldn't be taken at all. It says that it should be taken safely and responsibly, and that the harm caused by the excessive or inappropriate consumption of alcohol should be minimised. And I think that's what points us to what we need to be looking at as a council if we are looking at a LAP. What do we need to do to ensure that we reduce the excessive and inappropriate consumption of alcohol in order for people to undertake consumption safely and responsibly? So, alcohol sales, supply and consumption. What are the facts and figures? Before I start, there are 4 different types of licences. On licence, where you can drink at a restaurant or something like that. Off licences, supermarkets or the local bottle store. Club licences, the local rugby club or another club of sorts. And special licences, where you might be having a wedding at a external venue and you hire somebody to come in and they are selling liquor for that occasion at that venue only. The on-licence default hours in the Act are from 8 a.m. in the morning to 4 a.m. the next day. For club license and for club licences, it is the same. For off licences, it's from 7 a.m. in the morning to 11 p.m. the same day.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something there. One of the designations that I always find should be on there and is not is, to me, there's actually 5 designation for licence types, because there's a non-designated, which cafes tend to have. You know, in other words, they don't have a licence per se, or the rules only kick in when
they must have a licence of some sort,
if they're selling alcohol.
Even if it's just to bring BYO, bring your own. They have to have a licence. They can't have sale and supply without a licence. I think the only very, very small exception to that is somewhere like a motel that perhaps offers a dinner service, can supply alcohol, but it's sort of a very small, low minimum amount that they can do. Yeah. So in Kapiti, we have 51 off licences, 2 BYOs, 64 on licences, 30 club licences, coming to 147 licences in total. That is for a population, and these are 2018 figures, and I'm aware you just had Hamish's update. On 2018 figures, a population of 60,106, including children as well in that. Alcohol sales and consumption. Well, nationally, in 2022, we collectively consumed 498 million litres of alcoholic drink, which equates to roughly 36 million litres of pure alcohol or ethanol per year, which in itself also equates to 8.7 litres of pure alcohol per person over the age of 15 per year. However, 46% of alcohol is consumed in heavy drinking sessions. So that 36 million litres of pure alcohol is not nicely spread across 1.96 standard drinks for everyone across the year. 46% is drunk in heavy drinking sessions, which are defined as sessions where 6 or more standard drinks are consumed at one time. Consumption has remained relatively steady for wine and beer, but has also steadily increased for spirits and spirit-based drinks. In Kapiti, approximately $40 million is spent a year on alcohol. In the 2021 survey, community survey we did, 35% of respondents indicated that they drank daily and 47% drank weekly. Wine was the most favoured drink, followed by beer and then spirits and liqueurs. RTDs were the least favoured, possibly due to the fact that we have a larger, older population and RTDs are not quite the thing for them.
Can I just ask a question of clarity with those stats? Is the 47% drank weekly, does that include those that drink daily?
I would imagine it must, yeah. I can't think of any way it would make sense not to be that way.
Well, it just says that 82% of people drink at least once a week.
I would think that.
No, I think what they're saying is 47% drink at least weekly,
Yeah, so once a week.
and yeah, and of those, 35% drink daily.
I think that needs to be clarified.
I would like
because
clarification on that if we can.
I would interpret that to be 35% drink daily, and on top of that,
Yeah, 47 drink weekly.
drink weekly, which means
That's how I would read that too.
of people drink.
Which leaves only 18% who don't drink.
Pretty much that's right.
Which is possibly close to reality, but I
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Be
can
nice
look,
to have that.
double check that for you.
nice to have that clarified.
thank you.
Move on.
It's one of the 18%. The I just noticed that the with the numbers, they talk about the devil's brew. Did you notice that the $40 million that's consumed by 60,000 people equals $666 per person?
That's the devil's number.
Just saying, that's right. So, but the
Quieten down.
but that in itself is interesting. But we don't have 60,000 people in Kapiti, do we? I thought we had quite a bit less than that. I thought we had 55,000. So I'm not sure where the 60,000 came from. It does make a difference when you start a 10% difference in the population is a...
That had come from the census stats back in 2018. So obviously there will be changes in the population over time, but that is what it was at 2018. At noting that it was asking where were you at on the night of the census. So I'm not sure if that makes a difference, but there you go.
I don't think we would have had 10,000 visitors or more.
No.
No,
On
that's
that
just
night.
an interesting number. It just seems like a wildly inflated number from
Can we
all
go
of the
back to
numbers that
that
I've ever
slide,
heard before.
please?
Sorry, I just wanted to let you know that we do have an update on your question. We
So
have,
they're exclusive numbers.
yeah,
So
they are.
It was a question of how often you drink. And so 35% of respondents, 124 respondents, said they drink most days. And then 46 said they drink usually weekly. So they're not inclusive. It was an either or response, if that makes sense.
Do drink.
So we then had 8.5% was once or twice a month, and 9.7 was not very often, or presumably not at all.
So nobody said, you didn't have the option of saying,
Not
I
at-
don't drink.
So it was I guess of people who drink. That's how often they drink. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I think we'll carry on, actually.
Yeah,
We'll clarify that population figure later.
Okay, sensible drinking recommendations. Heavy hazardous drinking, as I said earlier, is defined as 6+ standard drinks in one session, which is equivalent to 60 grams of pure alcohol. Just in that little table there, you'll see that for wine, that's equivalent to 100ml glass. For beer, 330 ml bottle. Spirit drinks, about a half a can, and for liqueurs, for spirits, except for cask whiskey, a single shot. And low risk drinking advice is basically for men, for instance, 3 standard drinks, no more than 3 standard drinks daily, and no more than 15 a week, and at least 2 alcohol-free days per week. For women, it is slightly less than that, and that is to reduce long-term health issues. To reduce your risk of injury, the amounts are slightly higher on any single occasion, being 4 for women and 5 for men, which is 1 less than the hazardous drinking test. For pregnant women, 0 alcohol at any time due to the high incidence of fetal alcohol syndrome where drink is consumed. Now, the Act's definition of harm can be experienced by the individual, can be experienced by society generally, or by the community, or a mix of those at the same time, of course. Harm can be directly or indirectly caused, or directly or indirectly contributed to by the excessive or inappropriate consumption of alcohol. And harm includes any crime, damage, death, disease, disorderly behaviour, illness or injury, directly or indirectly caused or directly or indirectly contributed to by that excessive or inappropriate consumption. So under the Act, the definition of harm, as you can see, is actually very, very broad. Right, Kapiti's demographic, our median age is about 47.9 years, but for Maori it is 26.9, so a substantially younger average population. We have a higher than average older population, about 24.5% of our population. That's against just over 14% for nationally. Otaki has a higher proportion of Maori and a 31.5% of the population is under 24 years of age. Vulnerable populations in Kapiti are our older population. Why? Because of a range of comorbidities that they have in relation to drinking alcohol. Maori and Pacifica populations, a mix of reasons there, one being also that they often live in areas of high deprivation, and areas of high deprivation are usually heavily serviced by the alcohol industry, as they also are by the gambling industry, as you heard from Leslie the other day. Those in higher deprivation areas are in Otaki and Paraparaumu Central for Kapiti Coast, most of Kapiti is around about the middle of the road deprivation scale, with one or two areas of low deprivation. Where does the vulnerability arise from? Well, it comes from the greater access, though there are routinely more outlets in areas and communities of high deprivation. Equal shorter time travels, wider choice and price competition, leading to cheaper alcohol. The contributing socio-economic characteristics, experiences of discrimination, comorbidities, particularly for our older population, and exposure to advertising and wider marketing. This particularly affects our younger people who are significantly at risk of brain and development issues by drinking too much alcohol. And while binge drinking is less than it was in the 2000s, it is still quite prevalent, especially amongst secondary school children or students. So alcohol-related harm in Kapiti. We had some discussions with the police, and they did not raise any particular concerns, i.e. they did not point to any particular premises or particular times of the day or week where they have unusual issues with alcohol-related crime or harm. For road crashes, alcohol contributed to 68% of the road crashes in Kapiti between 2020 and 2022. And it contributed to 84% of the crashes resulting in injury. The incidences, back in about 2014, a major study was done across North Island and included Kapiti in it. In each of the areas looked at, it was assessed what level of change in the number of licences would affect in the level of violent offending and in the level of road crashes. For Kapiti, between the different types of licences, we had a range of 0, basically no change, up to 14, which is basically 14 more incidences, and that was in relation to other off licences. For road crashes, it ranged from 0.8 up to 1.8, so 1.8 more road crashes for every extra licence. Kapiti residents have a high to moderate risk of being hospitalised from alcohol-related conditions, and the populations at higher risk of alcohol-related health risks are in Otaki, Waikanae West, Paraparaumu Beach South, Paraparaumu Central, and Raumati Beach. Those statistics, those last statistics there are taken from information we got from the Medical Officer of Health for the region, and they're based on hospital admissions. Alcohol-related harm in Kapiti in relation to health. A total number of hospital admissions associated with alcohol per year over the last 10 years has been fairly consistent and is not really predicted to change dramatically. However, acute alcohol-related admissions are on the increase. A higher risk arising from partially chronic conditions is related to Kapiti's higher percentage of older population. So there in the table, for the wholly attributable admissions, we have a crude rate of 251 per 100,000 for Kapiti. For the New Zealand as a whole, it's 279. So we are sitting a bit under the national average. The same for acute and wholly attributable, and chronic wholly contributable. For both those, we are sitting a little under the national average. From a risk decile for wholly contributable, we're sitting at about decile 6, which round about the middle.
Is that for health conditions and accidents?
The hospital admissions data does take in admissions from injury. So it's not just going in there because you've got so highly intoxicated, you've developed alcohol poisoning. It's also going in there being admitted because you drank a bit too much, fell over and sliced your arm on something or other.
Thanks. Lawrence?
Yeah, I just have a question in related to, this is a couple of slides back, where we were talking about young people, the effect on younger cohorts. That was the slide just then. Can I just ask, is that information, so you've got obviously a statement which is significant risk for young people in terms of brain development.
Yeah.
Then there's the binge drinking one, which is still prevalent. Is that related to Kapiti data, or is that is that a statement that is something nationally that has been recognised?
That is a national statement, but I think that's when you've got to think about what's the profile of Kapiti's population, both completely and in part. And for instance, Otaki has a high juvenile population. So that statement would probably be relatively correct for Otaki.
Do we have that information specific to our district in regards to the impact on these more vulnerable communities that have been identified in this briefing?
What I will have with the report that you get for the SONF meeting is that a kind of a heat register of by suburb that should answer that to some degree. But the only place we can get that information is from the hospital admission information. And that is broken down, it will be broken down by ward, essentially, or SA2 areas, actually, I believe it is. That'll give you a better picture of that.
I'd be really interested to know what we can get in terms of on-the-ground information from some of our youth services and our colleges and primary schools directly related to alcohol consumption, because we can find that information and we know that around things like smoking and vaping. I'd be really interested to hear about around alcohol and the impact that is having on our young people at the moment. My perception that I would see from my limited exposure, but probably relatively high exposure, but limited still, is that I think binge drinking is on the decline amongst our young people here in Kapiti. But I'd be really interested to see whether that is mirrored by what stories we get from the people who are actually on the ground working with young people.
Yep.
Thanks, Lawrence. Hey, I've got 5 lights on now, and I'm seeing a few papers left in the stack, so we'll just whip to the end of the presentation, and then I'll take questions at the end now, just so that everybody's got the chance to hear the whole presentation before we wrap up.
Okay, community and stakeholder input. In the last decade, we've had 2 surveys with the community on alcohol related policy. The first was in 2014 when council looked at whether it would develop a lab or not. Information from that suggested that the number of outlets were about right. There was a mixed response to the capping of licences, with some response saying yes, perhaps some capping there, but no, not for there, or yes for that licence, but no for that. But there wasn't a really strong indication that we should be looking at that. Perhaps the strongest consideration that came through was that we should look at proximity restrictions to sensitive sites. So that is not allowing new licences within a certain proximity to, say, a primary school or secondary school or marae or health centre. The most favoured opening and closing times, and if you think back to what the defaults were, for on licences it was 12 noon to 12 midnight, which is somewhat different. And for off licences, again, it was 12 noon to 10 p.m, which is somewhat different to what the default hours are. The 2021 survey included 415 people. There was board support for additional or amended settings from the default settings in the Act. But again, there was no really clear, we think you should do this or target that. There was minimum distance between off licences and sensitive sites. That was one of the concerns that were expressed. And limiting numbers of licences was strongly supported, particularly in Otaki, Paraparaumu and Paraparaumu Beach. With on licence opening hours from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m, so a little bit more open than the previous survey, and 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for off licences, which for the majority of off licences currently in Kapiti are the hours that they are open, because our licensing inspectorate and DLC have managed to negotiate a voluntary opening and closing agreement with most off licences, other than the supermarkets and grocery stores. Other stakeholder input, the licence organisations, those with holding licences, were in favour of minimal restrictions and generally not supporting any change from the status quo. Community advocacy groups, a couple in particular, was the Cancer Society, supported more restrictive policies, as in their words, to avoid adding to the health burden to low socio-economic areas. And the Otaki community expressed deep concern about the impact of alcohol on their community, and especially on their tamariki and rangatahi, noting the high proportion of young people in Otaki. So what can we do with a LAP? A LAP provides communities the input at the policy level, reducing their need to repeatedly challenge licence applications, and has the potential to reduce alcohol-related harms, particularly through violence, road crashes, other injuries, and alcohol-related disease and dependency, through reducing the accessibility and availability of alcohol by managing the locations and density of outlets, and secondary to this, through price, as closely clustered outlets often compete on price, and by varying maximum trading hours that may be less or greater than the default hours of the Act. Okay, in deciding whether you should move forward with a LAP, a local alcohol policy can only cover this, the matters set out in section 77, which I'll come to in a moment. It must be reasonable and proportionate, so not a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Local, so relevant to the issues of the district or the community. Can be precautionary with intents to minimise and protect from alcohol-related harm. And the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority decision has held that the minimisation sought by the Act's object is not just to simply reduce alcohol-related harm. Rather, The aim is minimisation of alcohol-related harm, not merely its reduction. Minimisation means reduce to the smallest amount, extent or degree. What Arlo is basically saying there is you should be aiming for the least, the lowest. And finally, the balance, the benefit of the community as a whole. Oh, Section 77 provisions that you can look at putting in a lap. Location of licensed premises by reference to board areas. So you can say within Paraparaumu, we're only going to allow them in commercial areas, for instance. Its policy impact, it's a cross-license category. It can use it to control availability and accessibility, reducing easy availability and price competition. And the balance to that is equity of reasonable access and equitable rights to sell. Location of licensed premises by reference to proximity to other premises. So this is your density one, not allowing a whole clump of off licenses that then compete in price with each other. This also helps control particularly the clumping of off licenses in high deprivation areas. Its balance is again controlling outlet numbers while avoiding monopoly. Location of licensed premises by reference to proximity to facilities of a particular kind. So this is not allowing them to be within 500 metres of a school, etc. It reduces exposure of children and young people, particularly, or those that are vulnerable. Having alcohol outlet next to a medical centre where somebody is perhaps attending for alcohol-related drug dependency counselling, it probably makes life very difficult for them. But again, the balance is equitable rights to carry on trade. Where the further licences of should be allowed, that's your capping provision. It's a fine tuning of this really, that it allows targeting of particular license categories to reduce availability, price competition, excessive marketing, etc. And your balance is fairness and equity and equitable rights to sell. Your next one is maximum trading hours. As with subsection A, this provision can control overall availability and accessibility. The balance is equity of reasonable access and equitable rights to sell, and the balance between positive and negative impacts on amenity of entertainment precincts. So you may remember last few months there's been a bit in the news down in Christchurch where they've built apartment blocks where there are also nightclubs and bars. Now the people in the apartment clubs are upset that the bars are there making noise, etc. What is that balance about amenity between different uses of a precinct? Issues of licences or licences, that issue of licences or licences of a particular kind or kinds subject to discretionary conditions. Impact, well, it may allow for application of specific conditions, in particular one-off or recurring situations, i.e. ensure and renewed licences now meet local alcohol policy provisions. The balance is ensuring the alcohol sale and supply is undertaken safely and responsibly in specific situations. One-way door restrictions, which is probably the one I think least applicable to Kapiti. It's the staging of when people go in and out of premises, and it can decrease crowds at exiting time reduces migration between premises and can decrease preloading behaviour. The balance is it relies on effective working relationship with police, licensees and licensing authority, restricts personal choice and movement, and it has had problematic efficacy where instituted, i.e. there's not a lot of evidence that it's really worked well. Now, non-LAP based policies, what else can we do rather than those policies in the LAP? We could provide strong, visible support for alcohol harm minimisation. We can prohibit displays of alcohol-related marketing and signage on public footpaths outside within the vicinity of licensed premises. We can prohibit the display of alcohol-related promotion or marketing on any council-owned infrastructure, facilities or services. We can develop policies that require any council-run local event or events that require a council permit to not allow marketing and promotion of alcohol. And we can develop policies for groups, clubs and associations accessing facilities and seeking council grants to eliminate alcohol sponsorship. And finally, council can set an example by encouraging their own events or council-operated premises and spaces to be alcohol-free. So finally, basically, should we vary licensing conditions through a LAP? Do you think Kapiti should have a local alcohol policy? And if used, should it be applied across the district or only to identified communities, areas? And if so, either for across the district or just for the different areas, the range is location restrictions, proximity restrictions, capping licenses, trading hour restrictions, one-way door restrictions, or licensing, special licensing conditions. So that's it. I do have a little matrix I thought we could fill in if you wanted to, but I suspect more general discussion would be more useful.
Yeah, we'll rattle through these questions first, and then we'll probably be pretty much finished for today. And then I've got a question about kind of next steps. Jocelyn?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it was far better understanding than we had at the workshops. Just needed the time to understand it. So my first question relates to the survey in terms of the demographics, and I suppose here, I don't know whether people were asked whether they drank, whether they didn't drink. So it's about getting, however it was done, it was about getting a really good, clear picture of what our community actually really does want.
We can share the survey with you guys. We've got it is from 2021 and it's Kapiti specific, and we can load that up into the portal for you guys.
Thank you. So my other question too is that it doesn't really talk about, so I suppose you've got supermarkets, you've got bottle stores, and then you've got, people either drink at home or they drink on these, at these on licenses or clubs. It doesn't actually really talk about where people are doing the drinking. And I think that's important because if you're actually going home and drinking, you may not necessarily have bought the alcohol straight. You may have had it for a while, versus buying it and then consuming it straight away. And I think that makes a difference to how much potentially people might drink.
Yeah, that's a statement rather than a question.
It is, but I just did want to say that one of the things that we wanted to make sure was clear about the question about an LAP for this district is it's the lever it provides to support, I think, a broader conversation about, I'll say, safe alcohol use rather than perhaps no alcohol use, and minimising the impact of alcohol in our community. The reality is that just because you live here doesn't mean that's where you purchase alcohol or that you go to premises in this district either. So one of the things we started off was around central government levers for supporting minimisation of harm from alcohol, because this is really what the whole point of this is, and what our role in that might be. So the reality is, the context that we're operating in is people don't make choices just within our district boundaries, particularly since people move across districts and do a bunch of things. And so the question we've put on the table to you, or these ones really, are what's our contribution to the conversation? I'm not sure if that helps, Jocelyn, but I think if you thought about it in that wider context, not just within our district boundaries.
Yeah, I suppose
I
really
think we'll wrap that up.
it's about
That point
understanding.
now, and we'll move on
Yeah,
to
okay.
who's next. Just because we talked about that for quite a while, and we've got 7 minutes. Liz?
Yeah, I need to go, so I'll just ask a quick question related to what Jocelyn says in a way. I guess we need to focus on what is the problem we're trying to solve here and how is it best solved. And, we're not trying to stop people from drinking. We're trying to encourage safe drinking practices. My question is, to what extent do these measures influence that, unhealthy or unsafe way of drinking? And are there more effective measures, such as the things you've outlined under the heading of non-LAP, things that we can do? I think, to me, there's a lot we could do in that, and those spheres, because, if someone really wants to binge drink, they're going to get alcohol from wherever, If they have to drive, 20 minutes down the road to get it, they'll go and they'll do that. What research do we have that shows that the things we're talking about under the LAP do actually help in terms of reducing those unsafe drinking practices? Are we really wasting our time? Should we be applying our limited resources in those other non-LAP areas?
Yeah, thanks for that contribution. I don't think that needs a response. It's a good point, though.
Yeah, I do need
Noted.
to leave the meeting now,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you, Liz. Who's next? Sophie, I think. Oh, we'll go with Bede.
Just to clarify, are we doing questions or statements?
We can do either. It's a briefing.
All right, never quite
No
sure.
standing orders apply.
So just going back to page 20 on slides. Said at the top there, police did not identify any particular concerns for general behaviour. And then it said Kapiti residents have a high to moderate risk of being hospitalised from alcohol-related conditions. Now, am I to read into that the hospitalisations are caused more by illness and health rather than crime? So as opposed to like alcohol poisoning or cirrhosis of the liver, as opposed to violent behaviour from drinking too much? Right. Do we know?
Yeah, I think that was asked and answered. It's all hospital admissions related to alcohol.
Right.
If I just can help with that a little.
Some understanding.
Basically, the hospital-related conditions, I mean, I've got a big spreadsheet with it all broken down, like, injury and self-harm and injury from offences, etc. So it's probably, can best say, a mix. The number of people that are hospitalised for injuries are probably more majority of, when I say self-inflicted, I don't mean deliberately self-inflicted. They get drunk and trip on the curb, bang their head, or
Their jaw, like my neighbour.
Yeah.
So,
Just that sort of stuff rather than criminal behaviour as a result of
but
alcohol.
there is within that, and this is what I was a little bit unhappy with the police about, is that I tried to get some feel for the amount that alcohol related to domestic violence, and didn't get any really helpful response on that. So for me, that's kind of a hidden part of the iceberg type thing. The issue with the police now is that they don't automatically tick the box as to whether it's alcohol related or not, and therefore what statistics they do get, the police aren't comfortable in sharing because they don't feel that they are particularly robust.
Can I just note that we're going to have our police contact join you, and we can unpack that a bit more. So please have not shared that information, but
I
they
was
do
just
collect it.
really
So
curious about the way that was worded in terms of what I should read into it is all. And I'm just, probably don't want to waste too much time, but just related to that, do we know how much of our alcohol-related harm we are contracting out to Courtney Place?
Well, I don't think we can know.
No, I'm just
know that.
curious, that's all.
I think the answer's no.
Right.
Judging by the faces.
No.
Okay.
I was just going to say, sorry, the survey we'll send out does talk about where people drink, so there's a bit more information in the survey that we'll share with you guys, but not
Right.
that specific.
With the purposes outlined of the LAP, can those purposes also be fulfilled through effective district licensing commission processes? Or does the LAP bring in other conditions that can't be achieved through that?
I think we were trying to say that there's several different levers you can pull.
Yep.
So you've got the DLCs that have a role. We were saying that there's some things that an LAP could add to support that platform.
Yep.
And then we were saying, but actually there's some other things you could do that are not an LAP. And I think to Liz's question, which we will come back on, what do we think would be the most effective thing in achieving the ultimate goal of minimisation of harm from alcohol? When we come back to you, we will give you some more advice on that, because ultimately, anytime you put a policy in, you have to monitor it. And some questions that we've had previously from some council members are the extent to which we are able to enforce some of those things. So that would be the other side of things that we can come back to you on.
Okay.
Okay, how are people going? I've got a meeting at 4, but I can be late. Who else has got to go? You've got to go, Nigel?
You can go first.
No, you're all good? Can we make these really quick and the answers
Yeah.
really quick as
Yeah.
well, please, staff? Sophie?
This might be answered through Janet's last question around the timeframes and next steps, but in terms of hearing from the pockets of our community which weren't particularly well represented through the survey back in 2021, specifically young people, what kind of work is underway currently or will be underway prior to the development or alongside the development of an LAP, if that's the route we decide to go down, to adequately capture the experiences of young people?
I think that's quite a big question, and the question we're being asked first is, do we want to do one?
Agree.
How the engagement will look after that is, we can take it as read that we'll do a robust engagement. How
Sure.
particularly that looks, I don't think it's something that we can get into
I
at the
guess-
finishing
yeah.
time in a meeting.
No, sure. I
Sorry.
guess just in terms of Liz's question around what we're trying to achieve, unless we know exactly how that harm is affecting specifically the most vulnerable people in our community, how do we know what is then going to be able to achieve the alleviation of that harm for those specific communities?
Perhaps if
and
I know
individuals?
that we've
So
taken,
that's why it's kind of
yeah,
slightly tricky.
we've
get that.
taken
Yep.
we've taken an action to follow up, and we'll come back to you.
Okay, so it's more that engagement around what we're trying to achieve through the LAP, which is minimising the harm of alcohol. Yeah, and I think that's something that Lawrence touched on as well. Good point. Okay, Nigel.
Yeah, just quickly on in relation to that, question would be, what would an LAP give you in terms of solving a problem that the DLC doesn't currently have? So at the moment we have a really good system with the job that the inspectors do and the reports that the inspectors give, and in terms of the Act about harm minimisation, that's what it's really all about. The other thing too, Steve McDowell, who I've got quite a bit of time for in this area, he recommends not having an LAP, that they cause more difficulties than they solve. But the other thing too, in terms of timing, coming back in July, it seems preemptory given that Kiri Allen's Act is in Parliament, and that there will likely be some law changes that are likely to be broadly accepted in Parliament. Should we be at least waiting until that happens? And my last comment is just around the idea, as Liz pointed out, there are clearly problems. An LAP and the powers of the DLC are about harm minimisation. Some of the other issues, and as Sophie's raised around, education, etc., aren't the role of the DLC. They probably not even going to be the role of an LAP, but they are probably a role of council and regional health and the police and how we work in with those groups. So I don't see them being mutually exclusive. I don't think having an LAP or not having one is mutually exclusive to dealing with some of the broader alcohol issues that we have as a community. So, I think more discussion is warranted.
Thanks, Nigel. If I, because now I think we have a little bit more time, I will note, I think some of the feedback today and this last bit of questioning, I think I hear around the table it would be useful to come back and look a bit more at the options of what levers we could pull, whether that ends up being an LAP or we lean into something else to aim to look at how we best contribute to harm minimisation, essentially. So take it as given that the next lot of advice that we give will take that into account, and we'll come back to you on the point around actually, if you did decide that an LAP is the way to go, what the right timing is for that, given your points about legislation going through and what that looks like. So we'll come back to you.
Just one quick final point. I think it would be... Sorry. Go ahead. Hang on. You were saying, Ken? Trying to tell me... Oh, there we go. Just one quick final point. In terms of developing whether or not you should have an LAP, there are probably the most experienced people would be our current licensing inspectors. I think developing this policy in the absence of getting some feedback from them, to me, doesn't make any sense. So I would be talking to inspectors and saying, what do you think? They're on the ground. They're the ones who have to do all the work around this. And I think the steer that they might give would be incredibly valuable, just as a suggestion.
Thank you. We'll take that on board.
Martin.
Mine's a bit of a statement. Look, I just wanted to clarify, and look, I stand to be corrected here. The LAP request, if I remember correctly, came from the Otaki Community Board in regards to a bottle store application that went through up there where the locals tried to basically get involved in that conversation, and it was very restrictive on how they could go about doing that. The reason I say that, I didn't want anyone to think that this LAP is legislatively required. It's not. Taking away from that, I'm being involved in the industry. I appreciate all the harm aspect of things, but we actually do have a lot of tools up here. We've got an excellent bylaw in this space, and our chair and that sort of stuff also factors a lot of the requirement into all the applications they look at as well. So I think that's our way up here, and especially in building on what Nigel was talking to. The legislation that's currently in government at the moment really is a make or break potentially on whether we go forward with this as well, because if the rules do change and it's not lawyers that are representing people that are putting applications in, it's just the applicant themselves, that's going to change the dynamic quite substantially with regards to local involvement, with regards to being able to feed into what their wants are for the area. So I do think that needs to be taken on board and balanced out as well. And I do take on board what Nigel was saying, is the timing of this is really, I think, also dependent on that stuff happening in government at the moment as well.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that as well, Martin, because the Otaki community really did give a lot of feedback about how that they didn't want this extra on licence to be there, but due to the process that was involved, just actually couldn't be involved. You had to be an affected party. You had to have some. I know you probably don't want every single person coming into the process and having their say, but the actually ability for the community to actually go to the hearing and actually say something was very, very limited, and so that was that really did drive the request there to do something similar. It may not be an LAP, but because of the effects of alcohol, particularly in the Otaki environment, are so great, we just wanted to have some sort of say and try and minimise the harm in the area. Now, I did have a question for Chris. When you spoke to police, given that Otaki is in a different district, did you speak to the Kapiti police and Otaki/Horowhenua, or was it just a chat with Kapiti?
I spoke to both,
Oh, excellent.
and through their local stations, contacted the central intelligence bureaus for each region.
Okay.
The central region did respond, basically saying we can't answer your questions. The southern or Wellington region didn't actually ever respond. So yeah, it's been. I had some good conversations with some of the local officers, and they were as helpful as they could be. And I think when I say that there wasn't any feeling that there was any major issue or pressure point happening in Kapiti, that's a reasonable reflection of where they came from about things. But no statistics, nothing to be able to hold that up, other than how many tickets they've issued and a few things like that.
I think it would be fair to say that we're also going to see if we can link into the National Office Prevention Group, who look after the country in terms of, they call it their prevention strategy, which has alcohol and harm minimisation from it as one of their critical prevention tools that they're driving. So I think we've had a district response so far, and that information definitely is available. I think it might just be getting to the right portal and place for that to happen. So we will take some follow-up action. But I did just want to note, Cam, to your first point, one of the questions that I have for you is, if central government policy doesn't work or legislation doesn't work, is the right action for you to take to put something in at district level to fix that, or to go back to government and say, this is not on, this is unacceptable and you need to fix it? So, I mean, I just have a... What's that?
Can I say all of the above?
Oh, it could be, but it's a question that I'm putting on the table for you, because if something that central government does is impacting the community and we don't let them know, they're not going to know for next time either. And so I did wonder whether there's an opportunity there for you to think about which levers you're pulling, and it may be there's more than one. But if you're going to stick a policy in, I think we need to be clear on all the follow-up actions that go with it. You can't just put one in and then go, yeah, we've got it. And then, for example, we're going to put it in, how will we enforce it? And a whole bunch of things like that, and what it takes to do those things, and whose role it is, and a whole bunch of other things that go with it, alongside some of the, what's that, sorry? Yeah, what the cost is. Yeah, absolutely. All of that is going to have to come along with this conversation. It can't just be, shall we just pull the lever? So we will come back with more information about those broader options and how they sit alongside each other, so that when you are thinking about, do you want to take the next step, or is that the next step, we can be clear that that is the one that we want to take. Yeah,
and that's also where we're going to need the data, and hopefully get something useful out of police at some point, because one, we need to justify if we're going to central government, but as you can imagine, the local alcohol sellers are not going to be happy, and we're likely, potential to be in court about it as well.
Jocelyn?
Yeah, so, so now we're putting our minds to whether or not we should have a lap or not. I'm just wondering, and I certainly agree with what Liz was saying, and that's probably part of what I was going to say too, is that we need to identify what particular problems we've got. For some of those other areas in the countries who've put laps in place, with the issues that we would like resolved, would it be useful to go to them to see how effective they've been?
Yes, I think would be the short answer, and we will bring that back to you.
Thank you.
Can I add to that? Be possibly helpful to know how much it's costing them to enforce a policy, because again, that question comes up for us of the law of unintended OPEX, which is probably a current thing for us.
I've just got one.
Okay,
thing to
Shelley.
add. So I was part of the group that tried to stop the bottle store in Otaki, and I think it might be helpful to get Miriana Selby from Te Wānanga Reikua to talk to us about the frustration that was around that, the whole process, because out of that might be something that we can put in place to help communities, because one of the biggest things was that the initial submissions had to identify certain reasons why that shouldn't be there. For the Otaki community, it was really about the fact why would we want another bottle store? We had a bottle store, we didn't need another one, because it just adds to the problem. But hearing from someone who's been through that process, and she might join us, she's a very busy person, but she might join us on Zoom and just talk through the frustrations for the community in that process, and out of that might come some understanding and some practice around how we help the community to influence license applications, because it was really about the process and the lawyers in the room, because the lawyer just shut everything down, everything. Year before last, yeah. So they even had a pro bono lawyer that did the work to go to court, but the alcohol license lawyer was always in the room and just shut everything down on process and the submissions. So how do we help communities, instead of maybe spending money on a lap, how do we redirect some money to helping communities and submitters to do the process robustly so that they are heard? And I think she'd probably talk to us probably via Zoom, because she is busy, but I think she would give some insight into the process.
We can definitely look to do that. I would just add some of the information we might bring back to you is, given that we're looking at harm minimisation as our focal point of things, it might be of interest to understand, if we can get it, just alcohol sales in Levin as well, and whether the addition of a store in Otaki has made any difference to, in the vicinity of this area, any different to alcohol sales. Because if we're worried about either supply or demand for alcohol as an aspect of alcohol harm, it might be nice to understand that as well. So what we want to provide you with is the full picture, so that back to the, do we want to go down a pathway? Is it going to cost a lot? Do you get benefit from it? That helps with alcohol minimisation. I think that's what we'll put on the table as well, because some of the legislative changes that are coming through, I think, deal to some of the challenges that you've raised, or assuming that they go through, of course, but would deal to that. So we might try and unpack those issues slightly, just so that we're focused on what will this actually give you outside of those things.
And look, just a couple of things I wanted to add in as well. You might notice on your EMBs, there's a section there that's got licence applications on it. That's been put in place as a direct result of that stuff from Otaki, as well as an area on the website that does exactly the same thing as well. So I would suggest that community boards at least keep a casual eye on the EMBs. I do, just to see what license applications are coming through, because then that gives you the ability to front foot the timeframes if you do want to put a submission in against any of that. Oh, okay. Also, don't forget regional health. Got a lot of I've got a lot of information as well. If we do look at a way to address this moving forward, it's the same in the smoking space there as well. We're going to do a certain amount from legislation. The other kickstart to that, of course, is education as well, and maybe partnering with someone like Regional Council. They've got all the asset there with regards to literature and all that sort of scenario that we don't necessarily feed through our region as such. That could be another avenue as well.
You're not the chair. Oh, thank you. Why, thank you. It's nice to be here. I got my other meeting over and done with. It was just I'll just catch you up. It was just trying to work out how to get you information about Lagoima requests. So you'll be getting some information, and we're working out how to do that. So a couple of things. I think we're going to get a whole lot more information to help us make this decision. I'm wondering if we actually need to consider that in another briefing. I'll also point out that if we decide to do this, one of the delegations of the Social Sustainability Committee is to provide advice on draft policies. So that's a possible vehicle for further information to come back and be considered as well if we want to do a deep dive into anything. Noting that delegations are, they're not, that doesn't mean it has to go there if we think that this is something for the whole council, but it's a potentially useful vehicle to knock a few more heads around this problem. So there were just a couple of things I wanted to say, but I think it's quite a serious decision whether to do this or not. So I think we need to get all the information and take our time. I don't think a workshop, a briefing, and then a paper to council is quite going to cut it for this one. So yeah, I'll be advocating for taking, and in the meantime, we've got a chance for that legislation to run through and see what that brings as well, and the outcome of that, and what manages to make its way through. So that would be my 2 cents worth.
Thanks, Jenna. I just want to say that we've heard that message today. So it's very clear that there's several areas of where we need to do some more work. We had proposed that we were coming back to SONF, but take it as given that we'll be re-looking at the timeframes and when we come back to you, and I will close the loop. So I'll just let you know what we're going to do post this session, but it is going to be a longer timeframe so that we can get under the hood a bit more. Thank you.
Could I just clarify? Oh, sorry. Could I just clarify? Have we done a submission, or is a submission process into the second bit of legislation as such, or was there, or did we submit something into that? Or just curious.
Yeah, we did submit on the second piece of legislation. So Nigel and Chris went along and spoke to the submission. So that was the one where we recommended that the lawyers be in the room but not able to talk, among other things.
Well done. Great. I don't see any other lights, so I think...
Can I just say something before we wrap up for the day?
Well, you can wrap up, say something and wrap up, and I'll sign out. Thank you very much.
No. I just want to... Thank you, Lawrence. We're a double-headed monster. I just wanted to thank everybody for your patience as we juggled everything today. We had these extra things that we wanted to fit in, and judging by the extra work we want to do and some of the timeframes we're under, I'm really grateful that we did manage to fit in these extra couple of briefings today. So I just wanted to say thank you for that, and we'll try and tidy things up, but we heard today that we just can't always. So thanks for your flexibility and your patience and for staying so late. Thanks.